welcome to 20 Questions, Episode 7. Today our guest is Lord Owen. Lord Owen served as Foreign Secretary between the years of 1977 and 1979. He led the Social Democratic Party for 4 years, having left Labour to form it. He was the Member of Parliament for Plymouth Sutton from 1966 to 1974, and the Member of Parliament for Plymouth Devonport from 1974 to 1992. Lord Owen attended Mount House Prep School. He has recently published the book Cabinet's Finest Hour, The Hidden Agenda of May 1940. Firstly, what was the hardest thing about being Foreign Secretary?
Having to travel all around the world and particularly spend a lot of time in Africa while my eldest son was suffering from childhood leukemia. Fortunately, he recovered and made a spectacular recovery and is now fit and well.
What political job would you have most liked to have held?
Well, like most people who go into politics, I'd like to have been Prime Minister. It doesn't tear me up that I didn't become Prime Minister. But I think most people go into politics in the hope that they might take the highest office in the land because it gives you the opportunity to do things that you've long wanted to do in politics.
You are a qualified doctor and you have a very strong intellectual hinterland. Do you think we are best served by politicians that have very little experience of the real world? Will we ever have someone like Kenneth Clarke again?
Well, I believe that we should not elect prime ministers who've never served in government. And we've done that now twice with Tony Blair and David Cameron, and I think it has had very bad effect. You really do need to have an apprenticeship. Before I became Foreign Secretary, I was Minister for the Navy and Minister of Health and Minister for Europe. And those 3 jobs gave me invaluable grounding and knowledge, and I learnt in those jobs. I don't think it's possible to just suddenly become Foreign Secretary, let alone Prime Minister.
You campaigned for Brexit. What direction do you think the country should take? A hard Brexit or a soft Brexit?
The negotiations don't really fall into these 2 categories, hard or soft, or even the new word smart. We don't really know what will be the reception to some of our ideas in the framework. It will be probably quite difficult negotiation because there are elements of divorce in this. You are deciding to leave an arrangement which you've been in for many years, and it will not be easy. But I believe it can be done, and I believe it has to be done. I think the country has decided they don't want to be involved in the depth and in the degree of a federal union, which I think is inevitable if Europe is to be made to work, and it's not working at the moment.
You have written a book on the hubris of Blair and Bush. Will you need to add a chapter on Trump?
Good question. I don't know. I think Trump is too early to make judgments. He's a very unusual choice to be president, totally inexperienced in politics, but that's the reason they've chosen him. The disillusionment of the electorate, which we also see in this country, is of the governed from their governors. They don't any longer trust us, and I take my share of responsibility. They don't think that we have had their interests at heart in sufficient degree, and there is a feeling that we've lost values, whether it be truth or caring or understanding, particularly for those who are less fortunate. So I think there's a huge gap now being demonstrated in disillusionment, both in Britain in the Brexit vote and in the United States in the Trump vote. And we may well see that gather momentum in various votes in Europe next year. And so we'll see what develops.
Your latest book is Cabinet's Finest Hour, The Hidden Agenda of May 1940. Why do you think that this was Cabinet's finest hour, and what can politicians learn from that?
Well, it's a very specific moment when we had a war cabinet of 5 ministers, Prime Minister Churchill and 2 Labour cabinet ministers, Clement Attlee, who went on to be Prime Minister, and Arthur Greenwood. and they were against a proposition put forward by the Conservative Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, supported by the former Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, that we should open negotiations with Mussolini. Churchill said this had never been on the agenda of the cabinet. Well, the subject of negotiations, it was so secret that there was no agenda even. But I think it does show the value of cabinet government. Churchill did not resent this issue being brought to the war cabinet. He thought it was really meant negotiating with Germany. That meant Adolf Hitler. And he thought there would be a ceasefire and we'd never be able to get the war started. And at that stage, Germany was already occupying parts of France and very close to Calais. So I think this is an example. Eventually, Chamberlain moved his position towards Churchill's. The Foreign Secretary was left on his own. He was perfectly reasonable for him to raise the issue, but we made the right choice. And had we made the wrong choice and started negotiations, not only would Britain have lost the war, but the whole of the Western free world would have lost the war. So it's a historic validation, if you like, of the value of debate and dialogue in cabinet, something which we've lost certainly under Tony Blair's government and to a lesser extent under David Cameron's. Let's hope the present Prime Minister, Theresa May, restores cabinet government, and there are some signs she is doing so.
How important do you think the House of Lords is?
Not at all important, because it's not elected, therefore it doesn't have democratic legitimacy. I don't believe you should be a legislator unless you are elected. There is a role for a revising chamber, but if it is to go on being unelected, which at the moment looks as if it's likely since nobody can agree to elect them, then they need their powers to be exercised rather more carefully than they currently seem to do. It's a whole host of patronage. You just look around them and people are appointed by the Prime Minister because of the money they've given to their party or their relationships, friendships or others with people. It's far too large and, in my view, quite disreputable organisation for a democracy to tolerate in the present day, but we don't seem able to reform it. House of Commons doesn't want another elected chamber threatening their power, and the House of Lords doesn't vote for reform because it means excluding some of them from it on the basis of turkeys don't vote for Christmas. We seem saddled with this dreadful place. I only went there to make occasional speeches on foreign policy, and foreign secretaries have over the centuries gone, but it used to be rather rare to have as many politicians. Now it's full of ex-MPs, and as I say, I don't think it either works or is capable of taking democratic choices on legislation.
Why did you choose to leave the Labour Party to form the Social Democratic Party?
Well, at that time I was faced in 1981 with the almost certainty of a manifesto for the Labour Party, which I would not have wanted to recommend to the electors of Plymouth Devonport. And it was as simple as that. I didn't believe in it. I didn't believe in coming out of the European Union without a referendum, which was one of its central propositions, when Labour had actually given the referendum in 1975 when we voted to stay in. I'm a Democrat. I don't believe you can and should have come out now without a referendum. We've had a referendum. We've made a different choice, and we are now going out, and that is quite correct. But I don't think you could ignore the fact that we'd used a referendum. Also, Labour wanted to virtually change its defence policy and abandon nuclear deterrence. And I think at that time, when we had a Soviet Union and a rather aggressive Soviet and powerful Soviet Union, that was frankly dangerous. And there were other changes too over economic policy, which I thought would not make us prosper, but rather hinder our economy. So I had a straight choice. Do I leave politics completely, which I could well have done, and go back to medicine? And I was quite attracted to that. Or do I help start a new party and give people a choice? And so we created the SDP. And for a while it gave people a choice. It went up like a rocket in opinion polls, but sadly it came down, and there are arguments why. I personally believe we should have kept ourselves a social democratic party and not come first in alliance and then merge with the Liberals, but other people take a different view.
What was it like being in James Callaghan's cabinet?
It was a very good experience. He was an extremely experienced politician. He'd been Chancellor of the Exchequer, Home Secretary, and Foreign Secretary, so he is well experienced and wise. And I was very young when he appointed me, and he was incredibly careful not to interfere, but he was always there as a bulwark and as a source of advice. And I think he's one of those examples of a politician who becomes a better man for becoming Prime Minister. Sometimes the saying is, office maketh the man. Well, I think Callaghan was made a much better politician and a good leader by becoming Prime Minister.
Please tell me a bit more about your time at Mount House.
Well, I enjoyed it immensely. I went when I was quite young. I was a day boy living in Tavistock for the first term in the summer, when I was not yet even 7. And then I went in as a boarder at the age of 7. I left at 13 and I went to a school called Bradfield College near Reading. All my time at Mount House, I was happy. It was a very relaxed atmosphere. We had a former naval commander as the headmaster. He used to suddenly come in late in the evening and we were in bed and say, let's go for a swim, the moon is out. And so we'd all go down to the River Tamar and bathe in the Tamar, or we would spend quite a lot of the summer under canvas in tents. We were more or less Boy Scouts, really. He was a great naturalist and lover of birds and the countryside. And it was just a very friendly place. We learnt enough, to pass our exams. But a lot of people previously had been into the Navy from Mount House and went to Dartmouth College. And I think I might have done if the 13-year-old entry hadn't been scrapped. I think at that age of 11, I was thinking of going more into the Navy than going into being a doctor, even though my father was already a general practitioner and other relatives were doctors.
Now on to our 10 set questions, which we ask everybody who joins us on 20 questions. What is your favourite piece of music?
Elgar's Enigma Variations.
If you could invite 3 people, dead or alive, to a dinner party, who would you choose and why?
Clement Attlee, Aneurin Bevan, and Richard Crossman, all 3 Labour members of Parliament, people who I admire, but to the left of my views. So I would find it challenging not to be talking to people with my own rather more more centrist views. And there is an element in my political belief which is actually puts me very much more on the left on social policy and health policy. And I would have enjoyed talking to those 3.
What is your favourite piece of literature and why?
I think I have to be honest and say my anthology of poetry, after all, I haven't written any of the poetry, but it's a selection of poetry called 7 Ages, which I published now nearly 30 years ago. You can still get it in print on demand, and I dip into this book more often than any other book. Just read a poem or 2, and I love it, and it represents, I suppose, something which is very precious to me. It's those poems which have made a lot of difference in my life, and the 7 Ages of Man allows you to write about love and about war and about old age and being a baby even, and all the ages that we go through, and well described by poets.
Where is your favourite place and why?
My favourite place is in Greece, and right at the bottom of the Peloponnese. I fell in love with Greece when I was a 16-year-old boy, playing in the chorus of Antigone at Bradfield College. I go back often, and I designed and built a house where I can keep my sailing boat, and I can swim in the bay and keep olive trees, and that's where we go on holiday and where I love to be.
What is your favourite piece of art and why?
My favourite artist is a Cornish primitive painter called Alfred Wallace, who had a big influence on the St Ives School, influenced Harold Nicholson, influenced Barbara Hepworth, and I have two of his paintings, which my wife gave me. Primitive painting is out of proportion, and he paints on cardboard. He was very poor, old man when he started to paint, using rather primitive paints, and always about small boats on the sea, very reminiscent of the Devon and Cornish fishing boats and fishing villages where I've sailed all my life since the age of 6. I've always had a boat, and I've always loved Devon and Cornwall for the coast and for the creeks and the little places where you can sail boats up. And I've been a sailor, and still I have a boat in Greece. I've given up my boat now on the River Yelm.
What is the best piece of advice you have ever been given?
I think it actually was Shakespeare. This above all, to thy own self be true. Which in a way is saying, follow your instincts, follow what you are. Don't pretend, don't dishonor what you believe in. Carry forward, be courageous, go for what suits you, what's right for you. If you think something, say it. If you want to take some action, do it. And do it because you believe in it.
If you weren't a member of the House of Lords, what do you think you would be?
Well, I don't go there very often. I don't consider that's a job. I've been in business for the last 20 years. I've now given up business, and I live a retired life where I have more time with my wife and my children and my grandchildren, and I write books. And you mentioned the books I've just written, and I will probably start another in a few months' time. And I enjoy this little seizing a small moment of history and elaborating it and trying to bring the documents which people had on which they made their decisions. But I wrote a book called In Sickness and in Power about government and people who were ill when they were presidents and prime ministers. And out of that came the idea of hubris syndrome, the intoxication of power, the way people change when they are given power. Power acts as a sort of stimulant and can take people off the rails. They can become overconfident, arrogant. They know everything. And I think we've seen the dangers of that in our own British life. Lloyd George, Neville Chamberlain, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, both, not all four, I think, got hubris syndrome in their life.
What do you think your greatest achievement has been?
Well, I think probably to have had a happy life and to have a very strongly supportive and wonderful wife and 3 children and now 4 grandchildren. I think there is something quite unique about the creation of a family and people who you are very much in love with and who you draw strength from and they draw strength from you. And I think the concept of family life is a very good one. And of course not everybody has that great opportunity. I'm just lucky that I've been able to have it. And I'm very glad of it, and particularly as you get older.
What do you love doing the most?
I think under canvas with the sail up and the wind blowing and the boat heeling over, it's a bit like skiing, it's a bit like gliding, but the thing I've done most of is sailing. I think sailing, I could sail a small boat on my own or with others, and I find the contact with nature, the whole role of the sea, And for me, that gives great satisfaction and also great relaxation. I've only got to do it for an hour, and I'm completely relaxed, and all the cares and troubles of office and government are over.
Finally, do you have a hobby or secret talent?
Well, I love to sing, but I am not talented singer. I mean, Welsh people, I'm not English at all. My blood is Welsh with a little Irish in it, and I really do enjoy singing, but I don't think I've got a great voice. And so I like Christmas when we all sing carols in church. I like going to sing traditional hymns at church, in a little church in Wiltshire, where I live in the country when I'm not in London. So I think singing is I wouldn't say I'm talented, but I enjoy it.
Thank you for joining me on 20 Questions.
Thank you for asking such sensible questions. And good luck
Thank
to you in your career, and I hope you enjoy your time in school as much as I did mine.